So tell me first, what are, when we talk about anthropic constants, what are anthropic? Right, so they're the different situations that have to be finely tuned, have to be just right in order for life, not just human life, for life to survive on Earth or to even be here. So there were a number of those anthropic constants, and I'm on page 98 now, a number of those anthropic constants that that went wrong. Like so that spacecraft was designed to be exactly like Earth in a spaceship, right? Exactly finely tuned for to support life, to support the lives of the astronauts. So what was the first anthropic constant that was an issue on board Apollo 13? Yeah. Oxygen level. And our oxygen level on Earth is 21%, right? 21% of the atmosphere. And that was true in in Apollo 13. What happened when that oxygen tank exploded? What happened to the oxygen levels on the Odyssey? Yeah, they started losing breathable air, right? And that's why they had to go into the LEM in the first place. That was only designed to land on the moon. It wasn't designed for anything else because that oxygen level was deteriorating. And then what was the second anthropic constant that was an issue on Apollo 13? There's an issue for every mission to the moon. Yeah.
Atmospheric transparency.
Yeah, atmospheric transparency. The atmosphere is the thick. I'm going to use the word thickness. Is exactly right to provide life on Earth. But what happens to a spaceship, and this remains true, if it comes in too steep or if it comes in too shallow? What are the two options? Yeah.
It'll either bounce off the atmosphere or it burn up.
Yeah, it'll either bounce off the atmosphere or burn up. It has to come in at a specific angle, and that for us. Obviously, we're not, at least not yet for you guys. I don't know if anyone else would be an astronaut. But that transparency provides a livable atmosphere for us as well. And then what was the third anthropic constant that came into play? Yes.
Moon Earth gravitation.
Yeah. The gravity of the moon pulls on the Earth, and the gravity of the Earth pulls on the moon. That's why the moon stays in orbit around us, right? Our gravity is stronger than Earth's gravity. And what did that enable the astronauts to do? Yeah, they used that gravitational pull so that they wouldn't have to use as much electricity, right? Use as much power. It saved fuel for them to get home. If they were not able to do that, they would have died. The same is true for us. If the gravitational pull was different than it is, then we wouldn't have life. What was the fourth one? Yeah. Carbon dioxide level, and what was happening to the in the LEM, what was happening to the astronauts. Yeah.
As they breathed more carbon dioxide.
Right. It was a very small place, right, for three men. So the oxygen level was rising, and they had to make a very well-designed fix, although ugly, it worked, right? A very well-designed fix in order to lower that oxygen level. Without that, they would have died before they ever had the opportunity to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. And then what about the fifth anthropic constant? Yes, gravity. Earth's gravity, right? So at some point they didn't need those engines anymore. Earth's gravity would pull them in, and they would drop. And assuming that the parachutes would deploy, they would land a fairly soft landing in the ocean. But that gravity that was pulling the astronauts back home is also an anthropic constant, and you can see on page 102 if it were if it were altered by, I don't want to read all those, that much, our sun would not exist, and therefore we wouldn't have. About being fine-tuned, that's fine-tuned in all the words of the biggest constant ever, right? I mean, that's just these are proofs. This idea of design, everything that had a design had a designer. The universe has a complex design, therefore the universe had a designer. And that's what we've been talking about in this whole chapter. We're going to continue reading. If you would please pick up at page 104. Turn to page 104. I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to give you time to read. I'm going to do something else first. This for the assessment for this chapter, you are going to write a letter. It's not going to be a test, and this will explain that. The timing on this, where it says Monday, Tuesday, and all that, know that that is next week. It's not this week, obviously. We're not going to have people around this week. So it's due on November 9th. And we're going to use this chapter that we just read in your book. And then we're going to use a chapter from another book, which is called The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. We'll read a chapter in his book as well. And you'll have some time in class to work on this assignment. So I'm going to read this, and then we'll start reading the rest of the chapter, and you may have a little bit of homework. So here's the timeline for next week. Monday and Tuesday, you'll read chapter 8. It's called The Clues for God in Timothy Keller's The Reason for God. By the way, I'm assuming that by tomorrow you will have finished both reading all of this chapter and those questions. That's what today and tomorrow are about. So you will have that read. You will read Timothy Keller's chapter 8. And then on Wednesday, we'll discuss chapter 8, and you'll begin working on, it says essay, it's going to be a letter. You'll take notes, you'll write an outline as you read. You can't write in Timothy Keller's book, but you can write on a sheet of paper any notes and write an outline. And then on Thursday, you'll have time to work on that letter in class, and then on Tuesday of the next week, that will be. So here's the prompt. Based on what you've learned from reading chapter 4, Divine Design in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and chapter 8, In the Clues of God and the Reason for God, write a letter to a fictitious atheist friend, explaining the evidence or first cause you have learned from the two books we have read. If you have a real atheist friend, you can do that as well. But you're writing to a friend. Your letter should be typed double-spaced in a common font. I don't want Chiller or anything like that. I want Calibri, New Times Roman, something like that. And it has to be double-spaced. Everything, every paper you ever write for me has to be double-spaced. I work very hard to give you feedback on those writing assignments. We'll have more of them this year and next year than you did. and I need to have space to do that. So it must be double spaced, it must be free of spelling, punctuation, and grammatical errors, contain at least 4 paragraphs with introductory and concluding paragraphs, so 2 in addition to those. Define and explain the teleological argument for God. Make liberal use of the evidence about which you have read, Anthropic Constants, the clues given in Heller's book, quotes from scientists, etc. You must use both sources, both I don't have enough faith and. Please note that I'm not asking you to make a case for the God of the Bible. We're not there yet, right? But rather the case for a first cause or designer of the universe. An atheist would be much more open to that conversation, and that has to be established before anything else happens, right? So you're not making a case for the God of the Bible. You are not attempting to convince your friend of the truth of the gospel, but rather the existence of a supreme being that designed and created the universe. While I'm not opposed to you using scripture, your letter should be primarily based on science rather than scripture. So that's the assignments. You'll have time in class to work on it. I don't know if I'll give you that Monday too. You'll probably be pretty much done with it by then, but we'll see. So we are on page 104. And we're going to continue talking about anthropic constants. You can follow along with me as I read, and then we'll have some reading to do for homework. When Sun and Mission Control began to express doubts that the astronauts would return alive, Flight Director Gene Kranz countered. You haven't read this yet, right? What? Okay. I just want to make sure because I didn't look at my book. Countered their pessimism with, gentlemen, I think this is going to be our finest hour. Indeed it was. Apollo 13 became known as a successful failure. The astronauts failed to walk on the moon, but they successfully returned to Earth despite nearly lethal conditions. Just as the crew survived against all odds through those lethal conditions, we too survive against all odds on this tiny planet called Earth. The Apollo spacecrafts, like our Earth, were designed to maintain human life in a very hostile environment of space. Since human beings can only survive in a very narrow envelope of environmental conditions, these ships must be designed with incredible precision and thousands of components. If one small thing goes wrong, like a coil in the oxygen tank, human life is in jeopardy. On Apollo 13, the one small thing that put the crew in jeopardy seems too minor to matter. Oxygen tank number 2 had been accidentally dropped 2 inches at some point prior to its installation. That mere 2-inch drop damaged the tank's thin wall and began a cascade of events that ultimately led to its explosion. That's why the coil failed. Due to the nature of the components. So interdependence means that things are dependent upon one another. So everything had to go right for them to succeed. And that is interdependence. Kind of like an algae. They're dependent. The failure of the oxygen system led to the failure of other systems and almost to the loss of the spacecraft. Think of it. That one little drop led to all the problems the astronauts had to overcome in order to survive. It resulted in too little oxygen, water, and power, and too much carbon dioxide and navigational error. Like a small change in a spaceship, a small change in the universe would result in big problems for us as well. As we have seen, scientists have discovered that the universe, like a spacecraft, is precisely designed to create the very narrow envelope of life supporting conditions here on Earth. Any slight deviation in any one of the number of environmental and physical factors, what we've been calling constants, would prevent us from even existing. And like the components on Apollo 13, these constants are interdependent. They depend on one another. A small change in one might affect others and could prevent or destroy the conditions necessary for life. The extent of the universe's fine-tuning makes the anthropic principle perhaps the most powerful argument for the existence of God. It's not that there are just a few broadly defined constants that may have resulted by chance. No, there are more than 100 very narrowly defined constants that strongly point to intelligence and design. We've already identified 5 of them. Here are 10. So pick up here, and you're going to read the rest of the chapter, which goes to page 112. So go ahead and do that. I need to go look at my lesson plan to make sure. I think I'm having you answer some questions as